Okay, I'm still in part 4 um of this reconstructed but unregenerated regenerated regenerated regenerated. Okay, reconstructed but under regenerated. I think that's what it says. And this is part 4 of this thesis out of I'll Take My Stand by 12 Southerners. First edition book that I got at the library when they were given out, um, when they had a book sale. I thought it was cool and interesting anyway, because, you know, and it's supposed to be, it's a discarded book and it's a rental collection. That's what it says on here. And it must have been in the library a really long time. But instead of saying the West Memphis Public Library, it has Crittenden County Library. But it does have the stamp that said West Memphis, Arkansas. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reread, start at the beginning of this part 4, IV4. So I'm going to read it, start reading it again. So give me a second to. Okay. The South States were settled, of course, by miscellaneous mis, miscellaneous strains. Yeah, that's what it says. So that's miscellaneous. They got it in parts. But eventually, the one which determined the particular traditions of the South was the one which came from Europe, most convenienced of the virtues of establishment, constraining with those strains which seem, for the most part, to have dominated the other sections, and which came out of Europe feeling rebellious towards all establishments. There are good many faults of being found with the Old South, but hardly the fault of being inter, intemporarily, intemperately addicted to work and to gross material property. The South never conceded that the whole duty of man was to increase material production, or that the index to the degree of his culture was the volume of his material production. His business seemed to be rather to envelop both his work and his play with leisure which permitted the activity of intelligence. On this assumption, the South pioneered her way to sufficiently comfortable and rural sort of establishment, considering that an establishment was something stable, and proceeded to enjoy the fruits thereof. The art of section, the arts of the section which they were not immensely passionate, creative, and romantic. They were the 8th century social arts of dress, conversation, manner, the table, the hunt, politics, oratory, the pulpit. There were arts of living. There were arts of living and not arts of escape. They were so They were also community arts in which every class of the society could participate after its kind. The South took life easy. which in itself a tolerable comprehensive art, but also other communities in 1850, I believe, and doubtless others do so yet. In parts of New England, for example, if there are such communities, give me a second, my mouse is acting funny. Communities, this is their token that they were settled. Their citizens were comparatively satisfied with life they have inherited and are careful to look backwards quite as much as looking forward. Before the Civil War, there must have been many such communities this side of the frontier. The difference between the North and the South were that the South was constructed by con, constructed by such communities and made solid. But solid is only a comparative term here. The South, as a culture, had more solidarity, sol, solidity, solidity, solidity than other sections. But there were plenty of gaps in it. The most we can say is that the Southern establishment was complete in a good many of the Southern communities, and that this establishment was an active formative influence in the spaces between and on the frontier spaces outlining which had not yet perfected their organization of the economic life. That still sounds too high educated. Whew. And I hadn't been in high education in a while. Really hadn't been around very many. Okay, let me get back to this. The old Southern life was, of course, not so fine as some of the traditionalists like to believe. It did not offer serious competition against the glory of that was Greece or the grandeur of that was Rome. Grandeur that was Rome. It hardly began to finish match the finish of the English or any other important European civilization. It is quite enough to say that it was the way of life which had been considered the authorized. Okay, let me get back. It is quite enough to say that it was a way of life which had been considered and authorized. The establishment had a sufficient economic base that was meant to be stable rather than provisional. It had got beyond the pioneer stage. It provided leisure, and its benefits were already being enjoyed. It may as well be admitted that Southern society was not an instruction of very slowly elegance, but elegance for the so-called aristocrats were mostly homemade and countrified. Countrified. Aristocratically, it aristocratically is not a word which defines this social organization so well as squirency. Squirency. That's what it says. Squire artsy, which I borrowed from a recite article by Mr. William Frierson in the Suwannee Review. Suwannee Review. And the squires, even the squires, and the other classes too, do not define themselves very strictly. They were loosely graduated. They were loosely graduated social orders, not fixed as in Europe. Their relations were personal and friendly. It was a kindly society, yet a realistic one, and a realistic one, for it was a failure if it could not be said that people were, for the most part, in their right places. Okay, now it's going into something controversial. I'm going to read it slowly, and it says, slavery was a feature monstrous enough in theory, but more often than not humane in practice, and it is impossible to believe that its abolition alone could have effected any great revolution in society. The fullness of life is full the fullness of life as it was lived in the antebellum South. Antebellum, that's what it is, antebellum. I know, big words and reading in the South book. Antebellum South, but the different social order can be established today only by the application of some difficult sociological technique. It is my thesis that all were committed to a form of leisure, and that their labors itself was leisurely. The only Southerners who went abroad to Washington and elsewhere and put themselves into the record were those from the top of the pyramid. They held their own with their American counterparts. They were not intelligently as seasoned as good Europeans, but then the South culture had no very long time to grow, as time is reckoned in these matters. Okay, it would have bore a better fruit eventually. They had certain amount of learning, which was not as formidable as it might have been, but at least it was classical and humanistic learning, not high scientific, and not widely scattered upon over a various of special studies. Good, I made it, on time. Still got a little bit to go. But that was 4. And had some catchwords in here, so y'all don't get mad at me. And that was page 14, and that was on these thesis by this Mr. Random guy. Okay, you're listening to Loretta Nash's show, and we'll be back in a bit.